then you look at your hands, then you look at pens, you look at the TV even, and you're like, why is reality the way why are these things the way they are? Like, this makes no sense. And then it reflects back on yourself, and that's when it gets really bad. Then you're questioning, why am I autonomous? Why do I have free will? I mean, these are questions, I mean, that are truly in the utmost sense absurd, but you keep ruminating on them, and it feeds its own anxiety. And I don't have an answer. It feels weird, so I get anxious, so I ask more, and it's just off to the races at that point.
Hey everyone, I'm Sean O'Connor, author of the Depersonalization Manual, and today I'm speaking with Alex Benjamin from Cambridge, Massachusetts. Alex is 31 years old. Last year, Alex developed depersonalization disorder after a panic attack he had during a 10-mile race. His symptoms included existential dread, feelings of unreality, anxious rumination, and constant self-checking. Alex struggled with depersonalization disorder and its symptoms for about 9 months, but fortunately he has since made a complete recovery. As he wrote to me in a recent email, I'm glad to report that I'm very much recovered. And Alex is with us today to talk about his experience with and recovery from depersonalization disorder. Alex, you're very welcome to the channel. Thanks for being with us today.
Absolutely. Thanks, Sean, for that introduction.
So you're from Massachusetts, but you're in California at the moment. Is that right?
Yeah. So I live in Cambridge, Massachusetts. I work there as a scientist for a pharmaceutical company. Currently, I'm traveling for a conference. It's not this bright in Cambridge, Massachusetts.
Right. I've actually been to Cambridge. I went to I've been over for a couple of film festivals. So the other thing that I do is I work in film, and I've been over for the Boston. I was at the Boston Irish Film Festival. I was in Somerville. That's
pretty funny. That's about 15-20 minutes from where I live. So
yeah. Really, yeah. It's a great spot. And so I spent like maybe a week or 2 weeks or something in Boston. I absolutely loved it. Had a great time. I was there for St. Patrick's Day actually, which was bonkers.
It's a big Irish presence there. So yeah. St. Patrick's is the big one. Actually, it was last weekend, I think, right? So
it was. Yes. Yeah. Alex, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
I'm originally from India. I was born in India, and I was in India till I was 16. At 16, I moved to the US. I wasn't originally in Massachusetts. I was in Pennsylvania, actually. That's where I finished my high school, and then undergrad, which was 5 years in Philadelphia. And after that, I moved to Cambridge, Massachusetts for grad school. And after that, briefly, I was in Montreal, Canada, working, but also my wife was finishing up her PhD there. So I was in Montreal, Canada for a couple of years, and then came back to my roots, and I'm now in Cambridge, Massachusetts. That's where I work. I work as a scientist for a pharmaceutical company, primarily analyzing images for clinical trials. So, yeah.
Okay, so you've moved around a bit, but it sounds like you're pretty settled where you are now.
For now. Yeah. I do love to travel. I mean, if I had the opportunity, I would work and travel the whole time. But remote work is also something that's dying down, so it's not as feasible anymore. So
yeah, for sure. So Alex, can you tell us a bit about your experience with DPDR and how did it start for you?
Yeah, so I recently got into running, and it's changed my life. Running is amazing. I used to think of it as a very, very painful activity. Now it's marginally less painful, but there's some fun component to it. But last year was the first year I actually trained for a race, and it was 10 miles, so about 16 kilometers, down in Philly, actually. So it was over Easter weekend, so actually almost exactly a year coming up on that race. Wow. And I felt good. The race started up. I got caught up in the excitement, got to like mile 7, or at mile 8, actually. And for whatever reason, now in hindsight, I know I was having a panic attack. At that time, I felt just distress And so I pulled over to the side and I was like, you know what, I'll just catch my breath. Turns out when you don't know what's happening, your brain just goes straight to terrible, terrible, terrible consequences. It's heart attacks, strokes, all kinds of amazing things pop up in your head. And so I pulled over to the side, and then I kind of got caught in that negative spiral at that point. I just couldn't come out of it. And I was convinced I was having a heart attack. So thankfully, a lot of medical personnel and police officers, like taking care of race logistics, I just told one of them, like, yeah, I really need to go to the hospital. So called an ambulance. They drove me over to the hospital. They kept me overnight for observation because they were just concerned generally. Not surprisingly, in hindsight, again, they ran a full battery of tests and they were like, there's something really wrong. You were just either, he was overexcitement, adrenaline. You just got caught up in the moment and you didn't understand what was going on. So, in non-medical terms, you just freaked out, which is completely fair. Initially, I felt a lot of relief. I was like, oh, this is great. There's nothing wrong with me. I can resume my life. Turns out trauma doesn't work that way, because over the next month, I got so fixated on my heart health, and heart rhythms. And even if my heart rate would go up because I was working out or whatever, I would just repeated panic attacks, until there was this one night. It was 4 weeks after the race. I was lying in bed and I was looking up at my ceiling. I was really anxious and really panicked. And for whatever reason, the lights on my ceiling started to look weird. And I started to question. I was like, why do lights look like this again? And all the anxiety, all the panic that I had just was transferred to my reality at that point. And then I thought the next morning I would wake up and shake it off. But next morning, the moment I woke up, the first subconscious question in my head was, who am I? What is the fabric? Like, why am I who I am? What am I doing? All these abstract existential questions that I previously enjoyed asking in my life. That was my subconscious need in the next morning, to just ask that question and check. And at that point, turns out like I just kept asking that question day in and day out, until it just became a habit, until it became just a completely rigid, anxious habit. And every morning I would wake up, and that would be the source of my fixation: is who am I? What is the nature of my reality? What is my life? Who are the people in my life? Do I recognize myself? There were very, very many mornings I would wake up, I would go into the bathroom, look into the mirror, and be like, I do not recognize this person in the mirror, which is, now I understand, one of the most common actual symptoms of DPDR. So at that point, I wasn't really sure what was going on. I was very, very sure that something was wrong. So that was my initial bout. So at this point, I didn't know what it was. I just knew that I'm really fixated on these random questions in my life, and I'm really anxious and panicked all the time. Turns out during this time, my fixation shifted from my heart health to all of this. So I completely forgot about my heart health and everything, which, in hindsight, great, but it was replaced by something worse. So yeah, that's where I was at. So this is about a month after the race last year.
It's interesting, going through that in the middle of running, because you would be to some degree kind of conscious of like your heart rate anyway, like, and especially if you weren't, I guess, used to running that much,
yeah,
you might, like, I guess that one of the first things in panic mode that you would jump to is thinking, oh God, I've pushed myself too far, and now I'm having a heart attack, and I'm going to die. Yeah,
that's exactly it. And they run this test in the hospital where they measure something called troponin levels, which indicates heart damage. And they took me when I was in the ER. They ran the level, and initially it was a certain level, and then they run it every hour, and then they ran it the next hour, and it crept up, indicating according to them, heart damage. And so that's what prompted them to keep me in observation overnight, because there was an indicator that could have been potentially heart damage. But just to give you a sense, I mean, the troponin levels were like 50, and then it went up to like 80 or 100. Turns out if you're actually having a heart attack, it's in the 5,000s. So I was nowhere near what the damage was from a heart attack, but the trend was troubling enough that they kept me, which later my cardiologist actually told me. He's like, if you had no symptoms and you came in after running 10 miles, your heart would probably have some minor damage anyway. So, which is hilarious. So so that's what prompted them. So I think, yes, you're right. It was the fact that I hadn't run that distance before, the excitement of a race, the adrenaline, and just not knowing. I haven't had a panic attack ever in my life before that. So I didn't know what was going on. And so that's where I was at.
Yeah. Is this so interesting as well that, like, from when you look back at it, like from a non-anxious objective point of view, you say, okay, well, I was running, I was like pushing myself a bit and I felt panicky, and then came focused on my heart rate. And then I saw the is it troponin? Is that what it's called?
Yeah. Troponin levels.
The troponin levels, like, increasing ever so slightly.
That was it. I mean, at that point, you're thinking death is around.
That's it. Yeah. I kiss my family and friends goodbye. This is it. Like, because, and that's all that anxiety sees is that evidence that something catastrophic is taking place. Like I was running, and now I'm in the hospital. I'm going to die. Yeah. And the thing as well, the lights looking weird is such a great it's such a good kind of illustration of how these thoughts can take off, because what's happening visually is that you're just hyper aware of your visual field, and your pupils may be dilated. You're more aware of your peripheral vision, because this is what happens with anxiety and fight or flight. But if you're focusing on something like the lights, and you start to think, geez, but something up with that, like, what is there something wrong with my vision? Am I going crazy? And then off the thoughts go on that feedback loop,
And it fixates on everything. I mean, initially with light, then you look at your hands, then you look at pens, you look at the TV even, and you're like, why is reality the way? Why are these things the way they are? Like, this makes no sense. Why? And then it reflects back on yourself, and that's when it gets really bad. Then you're questioning, why am I autonomous? Why do I have free will? I mean, these are questions, I mean, that are truly in the utmost sense absurd, right? Because there's no answers to them. Nobody has them, at least to my knowledge. But you keep ruminating on them, and it feeds its own anxiety. And I don't have an answer. It feels weird, so I get anxious, so I ask more, and it's just off to the races at that point. So,
yeah. And you made a really good point when you said, you said I used to enjoy asking some of these existential questions. I mean, yeah, me too. I mean, I love, like, I'm a big fan of science fiction. I'm interested in philosophy, like, and this stuff, and then all of a sudden, all that stuff became like scarier than the worst horror movie I'd ever seen.
I completely agree.
Yeah, but what's really interesting is that, like, the questions themselves don't change. The thoughts about, well, what's consciousness, or like for me, one of the big ones was like, what's the thinking about the size of the universe, and from a non-anxious perspective, like, I absolutely am fascinated by it. I love like, thinking about it. It fills me with wonder and awe, and I'm intrigued by it, and I love it. But back in the day, like when I had anxiety and DP, that thought, like, almost physically knocked me over from the amount of fear it instilled in me. But what's really interesting is that, like, what doesn't change between having it and recovery are the thoughts, of the concepts don't change. But what changes is the degree of anxiety that we experience that we're bringing to the concepts, like,
Yeah, it is a very, very harsh filter, anxiety. Like you look at the same exact things, you just look at it through a different lens and you draw a different conclusion. I mean,
Yeah.
like Interstellar was, and it still is one of the greatest movies that I've ever watched. I mean, that movie was, yeah, that was it for me. Like if I watched that in that state, that was it for me, right? Like,
Yeah.
you know, and now I watch it and I'm like, this is magnificent. This is the best thing ever, you know? Um, but in that state, because all your pent up anxiety and panic latches on to anything and everything because it doesn't find any other source of danger, everything is dangerous. Like it's absurd how that works. Um, but yeah, so this was at this point I had no idea what was going on, and I think at this point I knew something was wrong, and I knew I wasn't feeling like myself. So my first instinct was actually to seek out professional help. So I called a couple of places, and I eventually found a therapist, and I described this to my therapist, and I was like, this is what I'm feeling. I'm feeling unreal. I feel like I don't exist. I feel like all of this is completely fake. And she goes, yes, this is anxiety. And initially I was like, this is not anxiety. I mean, I've been an anxious person. I've had anxiety for a while. And I know the manifestations of anxiety, right? Like quickened pulse, breathing gets a little tough, some coughing every now and again, you know. And I'm like, this is not anxiety. This is insane. I mean, these are much deeper traumatic questions that are being triggered. And she's like, no, it's just anxiety. We just need to get you to be okay being uncomfortable and just accept this heightened state that your body is in. And then once you do, the panic surrounding that just dissipates. At that time, I have to confess, I thought it was complete bullshit. And I was like, this is insane. So I tried out, you know, the standard of care tends to be CBT and other things, but I just wasn't seeing it. I just wasn't seeing any results. So eventually I stopped with that. And I was pretty lost. And this was the summer. So the race was in April, and now I was coming up on June or July. And I remember the entire summer was travel. So we were traveling across Canada. I was in Canada at this time. So we were traveling across the west coast of Canada. And honest to God, I look back at the photos from that time. I don't remember half of it. I just don't remember what, where, how I was feeling. I was so fixated on this one thing that was wrong with me that I just forgot about everything else. And actually, that's where I stumbled across your channel and your book. I remember the exact moment. I was in Alberta, Canada, and I was in the parking lot, just visited a lake or something like that, and I came across your YouTube video, and I was like, that description is exactly it. And then I found out that you had a associated manual and book, but I don't want to get ahead of myself. We can take this one at a time. So yeah,
Sure. But did your therapist mention the word depersonalization at that point as well? No.
It was commonly there was a lot of questioning around it. Do you feel dissociated? And I was like, I'm not sure I'm dissociated because I'm very much like in touch with reality. I mean, I factually understand reality. I know who the people in my life are. I have factual memory. I just have no connection to reality. So I don't think I'm dissociated. And that distinction was frustrating to me. So
Yeah. It's when you don't have a frame of reference for it, you just feel like you're being kind of like pinballed around all these different explanations, and some of them feel like they've got some substance to them, but you know, you also are, you know, as you said, I mean, I was the same. Like when I first like heard the explanation that this is anxiety, I was like, this isn't anxiety. Like anxiety doesn't make me feel like I'm living in a dream. Like
yeah,
that can't, anxiety doesn't affect my vision. Like that can't be right, you know. But that's what anxiety does. But it's just a different level of anxiety than what we're used to. Alex, can you tell us a bit more about the symptoms you were experiencing
Yeah.
in that time?
Yeah. So I think initially I had physical symptoms. Initially, because I was fixated on my cardiovascular health, I had symptoms associated with what one would call panic. So increased heart rate, sweating, pupil dilation, lights were all kinds of bright for me, agitated, kind of jittery. But then the source of my panic switched from cardiovascular health to the source of my panic switched to these questions, right? The very questions, the very fabric of reality became the source of my panic. So the symptoms of panic continued, but the source of the panic was different. But the symptoms, so apart from the physical symptoms, there were cognitive symptoms, and these were the ones that were far more troubling. Because if my heart rate quickens, I know I can do a few rounds of deep breathing and calm it down, right? It just follows suit. But the symptom of what is the purpose of your life? This question just played in my mind over and over again. Or why are you alive? Or what happens after you die? Or why is it that you are in your body and not anybody else's body? These questions started to be constantly in my mind. And there's nothing you can do. I mean, at that time, at least, there was nothing, I didn't know of any physical way to ground myself, to distract myself from these questions. So these symptoms became the majority of the problem is, who am I? What is the nature of reality? What is my purpose in life? That was a big one because it just seemed like a pointless void at times. And then I really got fixated on, why am I in my consciousness? Why is my consciousness in this body and not anywhere else? Or do other people also experience this? Like all these, it's even hard to articulate in hindsight, actually, because some of these questions are just so absurd. And yeah, and then the physical symptoms continued as well. I had restless sleep. I had a lot of heart palpitations. I had a lot of sweating. Lights were very, very bright because my pupils were dilated at all times. So, but those were less troublesome to me. The cognitive symptoms were the one that really bothered me. Like I would wake up in the morning and I would be like, why am I doing what I'm doing? And it would, instead of me rationally dealing with that question, it would just launch me into a panic attack, So those ones really bugged me. And then this is the unfortunate part. Like in July, or I think it was June or July, this was when I hit my lowest point, because I was waking up at that point like 60 days straight, feeling the exact same way. And then there's this slippery slope where you go from anxiety and panic to just straight depression, right? And you're like, this is the rest of my life. And that is horrifying. I mean, that is to date the most horrifying feeling I have ever felt, is waking up in the morning with a pit in my stomach and saying to myself, holy shit, this is probably what the next 60 years of your life is going to be. If you wake up in enough days feeling that way, your mind goes to some strange places and some really dark places, just factually true. And because it is trying to find an escape from your suffering, and it entertains all the possibilities that are bone-chilling and dark. So that I think was the lowest point. It's this repeatedly waking up every day with the same cognitive symptoms, the same questions triggering anxiety day after day after day, until at like day 65 or something like that, I was like, yeah, this is hell. So yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a very, very good description of what it is to kind of be like your life was something that for me I had just taken for granted, that I could just go around and enjoy watching a movie or meet up with a friend or hop on a plane and go traveling somewhere, and then all that's gone. And now it feels like my life has been kind of like turned into an experiment on like persistent self-examination of consciousness. But not even that, but like Like I remember like looking at, like I would look at my dog and I would start to like obsess about like what's the dog's consciousness like? What
Oh
is the
yeah,
nature of the dog's consciousness like? Is the dog aware of concepts? What's the dog's concept of my conscious? And this would like absolutely, and this would set me out. That thought would set me off on a panic attack for 45 minutes, like, and
yep,
I'd be frantically trying to calm myself down. And as you said, Alex, like if you're when these things are physical or just alone, they're physical, they're not pleasant, but you do feel like you've got a sense of kind of
correct.
purchase on them, control.
Yes,
But when the anxiety is manifesting as like these types of like runaway philosophical existential thoughts that they don't there's no kind of beginning and middle and end to them.
exactly.
There's no answer to them. It's just you're just being thrown about, and then someone has a conversation with you about like the weather, and you can barely focus on it, and
Oh
you're
no, yeah, not at all. Yeah.
yeah, yeah,
And I think this is, I mean, I'm not knocking traditional therapy here, people who are in therapy. I mean, I currently do have a therapist as well, and it's working wonders for me. But see, things like CBT, they focus so much on being okay with the physical symptoms of panic and anxiety, and it works beautifully. Like let's get your heart rate up and we'll sit with it and see how the discomfort feels, right? That kind of stuff. But how do you simulate a thought causing you panic? You cannot, right? I mean, yeah, okay, I could do 10 jumping jacks, my heart rate goes up, I'm like, oh God, I might be having a heart attack. That's fine. You can kind of induce that. But can you voluntarily sit down and say, oh, the image of my dog or my cat is going to induce a panic? You cannot, right? It just it just happens, and there's no like controlled exposure that you can do for that. And it's not even, you were mentioning that, oh, it throws you into a spiral, but the other thing is you feel cut off also because you're so fixated on these questions and the very nature of your existence that I used to look at my family and my spouse, and I would be like, I factually know who this person is. I feel nothing though. I do not feel any sort of connection whatsoever. Friends, family, books, shows. It was all just, it's there, it's factually true, but I feel no sort of connection to it because I'm just so involved and wrapped in my own head about these questions. And that was, boy, that feeling of emotional numbness is brutal.
it is. I remember being at like my family home and like being surrounded by family and just like pining for a sense of connection to them and being
Ex-
absolutely like petrified. And also like, I mean, it was just like a sense of like absolute disbelief. Like,
yes.
how could this have happened? Like, it feels like, it's something, it's like an episode of Black Mirror, or
Yeah.
like a science fiction horror or something. It's just like, okay, well now there's this guy like who's like, going about his life. And then one day he wakes up and he just is absent. And there's like a pane of glass between him and
Yeah.
the world around him. There's no explanation. Nobody appears to be able to help him, and there is no way to even mitigate it apparently at the start. Um, and it was the idea of like for me as well. I was thinking like again as you said, Alex, like the next like 50, 60 years stretching out ahead of me with this like and I'm thinking to myself like I don't know if I could do 5 hours
Yeah,
with this
that'll do it.
like yeah
Yeah.
yeah.
I
um
mean, and you caution against this in your manual, but your first instinct is Google this shit, right? And you find people who are like, oh yeah, of course, I've been having depersonalization for the last 10 years, or I've had it since I was 16. And I'm like, I've been doing this for 3 months and I'm done.
yeah
I am so done with this. and the full crushing weight of your future being exactly like this will happen to people listening to this, who will listen to this. That will happen. You will be at a point where you will refuse to believe that it will get any better. You will. It absolutely is a rite of passage, and I've been there, and yeah, I'm not going to say anything other than it will just happen, and you just have to prove it to yourself that someday you'll be like, oh wow, I can't believe I thought this way. So
yeah, for sure. So you said that you were doing a lot of Googling, Alex. So do you remember the point at which you came across the term depersonalization? Was it through a list of symptoms somewhere? Because I know your therapist had mentioned it, but was it just through Googling?
Yeah, it was just, it's one of those things where when you don't know what to Google, you just Google, you just have stream of consciousness Googling.
Yeah.
And you're just typing up random shit that pops into your head. So that's what I did. I was like, I'm anxious. I don't feel like myself. I feel like I'm in a dream. Reality feels completely fake to me. Like I just rambled that into Google. And then like the first page, I saw your video, and I was like, all right. I mean, at that point I was watching and reading everything, right? I was like, I just want to find a solution. And I watched it, and you described it, and your description was so accurate that I was like, this is exactly it. I mean, there were different, I mean, symptoms there was a range, but I was like, I definitely have at least 2 or 3 of what this person is describing. And so then I exhausted your free content on YouTube, and your YouTube videos also got into the solution. But I was more interested in actually the underlying problem. And that's when I realized that, one, it was called DPDR, Depersonalization Derealization. Finally, I could at least search with the proper keywords.
Yeah.
So it helped a lot. And then the second thing is I noticed that, and then once I used the actual keyword, boy, is it eye-opening. Then your searches just come flooding in. Then you're taken to blogs, and you're taken to forums, and then DPDR is everywhere. And then it turns out it is actually quite common. It's just that when you go to your PCP or you go to your therapist and you describe this symptom and you say it out loud, I feel like my whole world is not real. They're going to be like, what? There's no medical code for that, right? There's nothing we can do if you believe your world is not real. But the underlying panic and anxiety that it causes is wild. But that's how I thought about it initially. I thought it was, here's the question, that's what's causing the panic, until I read your manual and your videos, and that misconception was clear. But it's not just with doctors. I mean, try explaining that to your family and your friends, right? I remember I was on a trip once, and my brother would ask me, he's like, oh, what's your primary symptom of anxiety? And I would tell him, I would be like, I don't believe that I am real. And I can't blame him for being like, what does that mean? Of course you're real. Everything around you is real. You're physically present. How can you not be real? So yeah, so it was through incessant Googling and like just describing all the things that I was feeling that I came across your video, and your video gave me the term. And then once I had the term, I was more equipped to do proper searches. But yeah, I just don't understand why it's not as talked about, It should just be documented more. But it's such a strange thing. Primarily because also, like you say in your manual, it falls under the category of anxiety, right? There's no need to differentiate this as something. It's just you're anxious, and everything under that anxious umbrella is fair game. So,
yeah, it's one of the, I interviewed one of the leading experts in DPDR in the United Kingdom a couple of years ago, and I asked him this question. I was like, how on earth is it possible that this is so common? And it is. Like, what 1 in 50 people, it's estimated, will develop depersonalization disorder at some point in their lives. And 75% of people will experience DPDR at some point in their lives, briefly, typically. but it's the most common thing in the world. That's 2 out of every 100 people who develop depersonalization disorder. I was like, how is it possible that it's not being diagnosed as much as it should be? And he said, well, it's quite simple, really. He said the first reason is it's quite difficult to describe.
Yeah.
So if you've never heard of the word agoraphobia before, but you describe the symptoms of agoraphobia because they're so environmentally specific,
yeah,
it's quite easily recognizable and diagnosable. The same with kind of claustrophobia, social anxiety disorder, obsessive compulsive disorder, but with depersonalization, derealization, because the symptoms can feel a lot more kind of vague, not vague, but kind of hard to describe than that. It tends to get lumped in with anxiety because the people who present with DPDR are very often also presenting with all the other symptoms of anxiety that come with it, like they may be like weight loss, lack of sleep, etc., etc. One of the other reasons
the triggers are random. The triggers are random, right? I mean, with claustrophobia, if you say that, oh, if the walls get a little too close, I get uncomfortable. You're like, oh, yeah. But here you're like, I'm staring at my cup of coffee, and all of a sudden I'm having a panic attack. They're like, what? I mean, what is? It has nothing to do with anything. So,
yes, and also one of the other main reasons is that people tend not to describe the symptoms, or at least not to describe them to the extent that they're experiencing them, because they're afraid that they're quote unquote going crazy, which is something I absolutely thought. I thought when I went into my doctor back in 2005, and I was saying to him, like, I feel like I'm not here. I feel like I'm in a dream. I thought, like, sure, that's it. Like, there's going to be a van waiting for me outside. Like, I'm finished. Like, I'm making light of it now. I was terrified. I thought this is it. Like, and when he said that's anxiety, or well, he was definitely confused at what I was saying, but he did kind of like bring it down to, he said, okay, well, you seem quite anxious, so this probably is anxiety. And again, technically it's not incorrect. It is actually a correct diagnosis, but it was nowhere near the amount of information that I needed. And it seems that from all the people I've spoken to, that almost everybody has a period of time between when they first develop the condition and when they get the diagnosis, whether that's through a therapist or a doctor or through Google or whatever. But that period of time when you don't know what's happening and you're really going through the ringer is so difficult. But the reason it's difficult is because you don't have a framework for explaining it. And you just think, well, I'm stuck with this. There's no explanation for it. I've got some, like, I thought I was going to be in the medical history books, but hopefully we'll get to a place within the next maybe 5 or 10 years, because it is definitely becoming, people are definitely talking about it more. It's a lot better known than it was. They'll get to a place within the next couple of years where it will be as recognized as when somebody walks into a doctor's office and presents with symptoms of agoraphobia or claustrophobia, the doctor will say, "This, or you're unreal. That's called depersonalization. It's a symptom of anxiety." Because if I had that explanation on day one, it would have saved me a long time of as you said, Alex, trawling through posts and forums and being terrified, freaking yourself out, freaking other people out. It's save yourself a lot of time,
I mean, there's also a human cognitive bias, right? If something good happens to us, we don't question it and obsess over that question as much. We just oh yeah, this is good. I'm going to enjoy it. But if something is off, it is a biological need to rationalize what the hell is going on. And in rationalizing it, you make it so much worse. I mean, I can quote your manual at this point, but you at one point said you entertained the possibility that you had died and woken up or in purgatory or something like that, after, right? I mean, all of that in hindsight seems like a fun analogy, but people don't realize, can you imagine the level of terror for a rational mind to entertain even that possibility. It's a level of panic that I have. It's outstanding, actually. It's impressive how much panic and anxiety there is behind it. So,
yeah, I remember at one point thinking like I didn't know it was possible to feel as frightened as I did. It was like the most fear I'd ever felt in the past, and then take that and then just like multiply it by a factor of 20, and it was worse because it was like in my bones. It was every thought. It was existential, and it felt like it was going on forever.
and all the time, round the
All
clock.
the time, round the clock.
Yeah. I had nothing when I slept. Thankfully, I could sleep and everything would shut off. But
okay.
I know in your case, and there are other people wake up with nightmares of this stuff.
Yeah.
So there's no,
Yeah.
yeah, it's ridiculous how nonstop it is.
I was going to ask you, Alex, about what was your lowest point, but I think you probably mentioned it earlier.
Yeah, that was it.
Yeah, yeah,
It was on a flight. I was about to land during one of my travels, and I had just taken a short nap. And I woke up from the nap, and obviously the first thing I did subconsciously was check. I had this like list of existential questions that I would go through, hoping that one day, in one morning, I would wake up and they would all just have answers. So I went through that list, and I had an answer for none of them. And I remember turning to my wife, who was sitting next to me, and I was like, I'm having some really, really bad thoughts about my future. And that was the lowest point. That was as bad as it got. That was it. That was like, this has got to be what true hell is like. So
yeah, yeah. It is. I remember, as you mentioned earlier, I had one of the thoughts that I had was that like I had died in like a car crash, or I died in my sleep or something, and that now I was like a spirit, and I was like trying to kind of make sense of this new reality, which is absolutely ridiculous. But at the time, when you are thrust into this like what feels like a new reality of like being completely cut off from reality, and also your rational brain is perfectly fine. There's nothing actually wrong with you. So your rational brain is frantically looking for an explanation as to what this could be, and it feels like everything has been like taken away from you, and so your brain jumps to like big, massive conclusions, which are then exacerbated by the fact that with anxiety we tend to catastrophize. So then, of course, you're going to jump to conclusions like, oh, well, what if I died? What if I'm, and then you disregard, like somebody says to you, well, it's anxiety. You're like, oh no, I probably died. Like, I mean, let's forget about Occam's razor.
Yes.
I probably died. I'm a ghost. Like, I mean, again, this is the kind of thing I'm laughing about it now. Like, but I mean, at the time, I was entertained that notion because nothing else made sense. It was one of the explanations that as far-fetched as it seemed, felt like it was at least an explanation, because I didn't have one,
Yeah, it's the desperate search for a reason at that point. You're trying. Yeah, and I mean, also the human mind is very, very, very creative. It's just unbounded in its creativity in the stuff that it comes up with. I mean, you're exploring like, and I don't want to minimize. I mean, these are some you're exploring and you're entertaining schizophrenia, you're bipolar, multiple personality disorder. You're like, oh, maybe I've always been crazy, and I mean, you're entertaining things that in hindsight you're like, wow, I can't believe I went there. But in the moment you entertain them, it makes your panic worse, it makes the questions worse, and it just so that negative feedback loop is a positive feedback loop actually is vicious. So
yeah, certainly. were you working throughout this whole period as well? I spot, yeah.
Yeah. So I was shockingly very functional during this time as well, because, and this is something I realized in hindsight, when I would work, I would forget about the DPDR because I would get so caught up in the work, and I would be like, oh, wow, I really got to focus on this. And then as soon as I would step away from the work, back to the subconscious ruminating. So thankfully, I did not stop working out. I did not stop socializing. I did not stop traveling. I did not stop working. It was miserable to do all of it, but I forced myself to do it every day. Never stopped, not one day. And there were days when I was like, I just don't want to do anything. But I just kept that routine and I kept that habit, and I just, even if it felt completely autonomous with no emotional backing to it, I just went out and did it anyway. So
That's amazing. That's great to hear. Yeah, especially that period in the first period when it happens, because you feel like your basic functions as a human being no longer function. But and also one of the mistakes that many people make, and I certainly did, was we you think to yourself, well, I'm sick, so I need to like square myself away until I start to recover. But when we do that, that just creates all the space for the anxiety to fill up. And of course, it's not like you're taking days off, like, because the days off, I was just researching DPDR and anxiety all day, every day.
Yeah, you're just ruminating during your time off. And I did this to some extent. I wouldn't say it was fully functional. Like, people would ask me, hey, do you want to meet up? And I'd be like, hey, I'm not really feeling well. So when I'm feeling well, I'll circle back. And I did that. I pushed off a fair bit of social obligations and social plans, because I was like, no, I'll just do it when I feel better. And there is no feeling better. It just doesn't go away. It just stays until, I mean, to be fair, you did not have the benefit of having your own experience. Like we did. So we could shorten our misery by a lot. You, on the other hand, had to go through it and then disseminate it publicly for us. But, when I read your manual, and you were like, you had this checklist of, here's all the things you got to do every day and just make sure you hit them. I was partially doing that even before I read your manual. But yes, there were very many things I was putting off. I mean, for example, like I pleasure started to drop. I didn't find any pleasure in eating. I knew I had to eat. I knew I had to fuel up. And I know you mentioned this in your manual, that you lost a lot of weight. I mean, I was conscious of the fact that if I don't eat, other things are gonna go wrong. So I'm gonna eat. But I was like, yeah, it is what it is. It's just fuel. Like the basic pleasures of life just eluded me for a while.
I remember looking at like plates of food that I would have like destroyed back in the day, like, and knowing like I haven't eaten today, and looking at the plate of food, and it just looked like pixels. Yeah. It was just like, I don't like, the last thing I want to do is put this into my body. Like, it was just, at one point I had to get like protein shakes, like, my God love them, my mother and my father were like trying to do everything they could for me, but like I like was just like Sean needs to put something into his body, because like Sean's not a large man anyway, like, but Sean has dropped a crazy amount of weight, like, I was skeletal, like, it was quite bad. But, and again, like, it's that thing of like, when you're going through it, my first thought when that was happening was like, well, I've developed some wasting disease. Like, I've got some awful thing where my stomach has stopped working or whatever. Yeah. And then again, it's like when you come out of it and you look back on it, you're like, well, one of the things that your body deprioritizes in fight or flight response is hunger, is your appetite. Exactly. Again, one of these many things that like have the simplest possible explanation, but when you're going through it without that explanation, without a framework for a context for it, it just feels like the next thing in an obstacle course of horrors that you have to go through.
Yeah, no, yeah. Accurate. at the end of the day, despite the source of the terror and panic, the the physiological response of your body is identical to as if you were being chased by a lion, right? It's the same mechanism. So
Yeah.
it deprioritizes hunger and thirst and any kind of recreational pleasures. You're not seeking any of them, right? It's like, no, I don't care. I need you to survive right now. I don't want you to go have a drink with your friend or, or watch a movie. So all of those get deprioritized because you're just so fixated on this one condition, this one problem. You're just like, I need to solve these existential questions and then my anxiety will go away. Yeah. I mean, as I say it out loud, it's weird. It's so strange to hear that at some point my brain was like, you have to solve some of the world's most unsolved questions before you can feel better, you know?
I know. And the thing you mentioned as well of like having the list of questions
Oh,
and hope and like thinking, okay, someday I'll come back at these and there'll be answers to them and this will lift, like, and for me, like I had a very similar thing where I'd wake up in the morning and I would just check to see was the anxiety there, is that DP there, and of course because I was checking in on it, it was there, and then that would just absolutely like demoralize me
you're done.
for oh my god, and just thinking like I'm just now I have to drag myself through another
The
24 hours
rest
of
of the
this
day.
of this nonsense, like um and then what you realize during recovery is that it's not about getting to a point where you can like wake up 5 days in a row and check to see if it's there and it's not there. What you're doing is you're training yourself to stop checking. Yeah, it's the checking that's keeping it going, because that's what communicates to your brain that this is important. This is something that you need to check on, and it's actually not, and that's the one of the engines that keeps it going. So Alex, how did your recovery start? At what point did you begin to see improvements?
So yeah, so mid-June of last year, I saw your video. I saw that there was a manual and I bought it. I was like, well, for the record, for what it does for your life, it is a rather inconsequential amount of money to buy the manual. I mean, I was like, I would have paid whatever I needed to. And so I got your manual, and I have to be honest, what I was expecting your manual to be was a deep discussion and from a medical standpoint and psychological standpoint on the underlying causes and of this trauma and underlying reasons why DPD. And I got your manual, and then I finished it, and I was like, wait a minute, what? This manual, it's not on the face of it, you're like, it's not telling me to do anything. It's just telling me to not do something. And I'm like, this can't be right. What about, so full disclaimer, initially I was like, all right, I think I'm out some money and I'm not going to get anything out of this.
Oh no. Oh no.
I'm like, it's fine. People have been scammed for worse. So I'm like, it's okay. But then, so that was day one. And then during the day, I read it. Then I came home, I read it again. And then I realized I didn't know initially that there were audiobooks associated with it and your own testimonials and FAQs. And I listened. I opted to then listen to the book. I listened to the entire book every day for like a month. And slowly, all of the things that you mentioned in your manual started to make so much sense, specifically the piece about habit forming and breaking habits. And when it clicked in my mind that I had formed a really bad, anxious habit of ruminating on things that are seemingly, and they are, irrelevant, that was the day I would say my recovery truly started, because I was like, holy shit, this guy is really on to something here. Because you make these analogies in your manual about quitting smoking or quitting eating junk food and things like that. And you say it in your manual. It's like, if you want to quit smoking, what are you going to do? Sit there and just tell yourself, no, I'm not going to smoke, and explain to yourself all the downsides of not smoking. Of course, smoking is bad. I mean, this is not an endorsement for or against. Do whatever you want. But, of course, you can sit there and do that. But that doesn't help you with not smoking. You have to replace the act of not smoking with something. And it was that moment I remember I was like, oh my God, this makes so much sense. It's such a satisfying explanation. The manual is so self-contained. It's so simple. And that was the day, and I think it was mid-July at this point, where I was like, holy shit, this is really good. That was the moment I started recovering, but the road to recovery it's still tough. You still wake up in the morning and it's a habit. So you subconsciously want to do what you've been doing. But if you catch and interrupt that thought, it's excruciating, because you do that, you're like, oh, am I real? You're like, instead, why don't I focus on making a good coffee today? And while you're making that cup of coffee, your brain is going, what the hell are you doing? You're ignoring some serious alarms that I'm throwing you, and you're making a cup of coffee. What the hell is going on? And so then inevitably, for people who are watching it, you will go back. You'll be like, okay, fine, I give up. I'm just going to listen to your alarm bells again. But just over and over and over again, if you start to basically associate having the thought with doing something else. So anytime you have the thought, you're like, oh, I'd rather do something else. And that becomes the habit then. And what eventually happens is that your brain just deprioritizes having to check, because it's like the last time you checked, nothing really good came out of it. If then the last time you had the urge to check about your reality, you went and made a cup of coffee, at least you got coffee. That's a tangible result. So you'd rather do something more productive. And then, like, over the course of the next 3 or 4 months, do this daily, religiously, and it's painful, and there are setbacks, and there are days when you think you've reached step 1 all over again because you had a bad day. But the power of habits are incredible. At some point, the habit gets so ingrained that you wake up one morning and you don't check. You don't check not because you don't have the urge to check. You don't check because you've established a more positive habit that I would rather get out of bed and go for a run. And when you go for a run, you're in so much pain, you forget about anything anyway. So, you go with that. So that, I think, so your entire explanation about habits, forming habits and breaking habits, is the day I think I started to recover. And for anybody watching and listening, if that idea sinks in, it will make so much sense that day. And then, from then on, it was a matter of practice and investing the time.
Yeah, that's great. And there's a lovely description of, like, you're so right that, like, habits are, that's the basic kind of machinery of behavior and thoughts. Like, it's just, we kind of get into this idea, I've got this thought and I can't get rid of it. Like, but you can, but when we think of it like this, it's a switch that I'm trying to find and turn off, then you're just tripping yourself up, because that's not how thoughts work. But you can train yourself away from any thought pattern, but you have to consciously place another pattern on top of that. But it's the same thing with doing anything, with like exercising, with changing a diet, with like quitting smoking. There's a lovely phrase about changing a habit that says it's simple, but it's not easy.
Yep.
So for like quitting smoking, perfect example. Quitting smoking, it's simple. Just don't smoke. But it's not easy,
Yeah.
But you have to give yourself the time and the space for that thought habit to be replaced by a new one. For me, like, I got into the habit actually probably more like 10 years ago, of getting up early in the morning. So I'm up at 7 on weekdays, right? And I get up and I have a morning routine that I do. So if I get up and I do that morning routine, I'll have a good day.
Yeah.
Okay. So I'll be on top of my work. obviously there's going to be challenges or whatever, but like I will get through the day and I'll have a good attitude about it, and I'll sleep well in the evening, okay, or that night. So I love it, and I think it's so positive, it's so beneficial, right? Every single morning when my alarm goes off at 6:55, I wake up and I go, oh, gee, not again, right?
Yes.
But the because I'm nice and relaxed, I'm in bed, like,
Oh yeah.
But the thing is that doesn't matter, because because the habit is like, get out of bed.
Get out of
You
it.
have like now I'm someone who gets out of bed at 7, so like I'm not going to have a lie in until 8 o'clock, because the habit has taken over, right? The habit is kind of pushing me through that. But like the first kind of like 21 days or 30 days or whatever that I did it, it was just like, Jesus,
Yeah.
this is a nightmare. But then it's just the habit takes over. The same with yourself with running, I presume, Alex, or with kind of any exercise. Like, you have days where like, oh, it's raining outside, I don't feel like it, but the habit just says it's go run. Like
It's
you have to
time.
go, man. Sure. Yeah, it's time. You know, it overrules those other the supposed like mitigating factors and just kind of pushes through them. But it's about kind of giving yourself the time for that, the habit to kind of to rev up, for that kind of um that wheel to kind of like
Okay.
to gain its own momentum.
Yeah, I mean, there's phases, right? There's the initial phase where you know you have to do something, but you're fighting it, right? With a thought pattern, it's I know I'm not supposed to think about this. I need to replace it with something else, but you're gonna fight it. You're gonna be like, no, but I still want to ask this existential question instead. And then there's the second phase where you're like, you know what? It's all kinds of uncomfortable to make this switch. I'm just gonna make the switch and not give a shit about how uncomfortable it feels. And then there's a final phase where it all solidifies and you're like, I can make this switch at will. If I have a thought pattern, I can switch to something else, and there's no discomfort associated with it. It's just practice. I'm sitting at work and I'm like, oh God, why do computers look like this? Why am I at work? What is the purpose of my life? And then every time that happened, I had to replace it with something else. I mean, it happens like thousands of times a day in the when you're entrenched in a habit. That means thousands of times a day you're refocusing your effort. And every time you do, it's painful. But every time you do, it builds up that memory of it builds up that interrupt, right? Until the interrupt becomes natural. Now, I mean, people expect to fully recover and never have a thought associated with existential reality ever again. That's not the case. You'll have the thought. I mean, I sit down and sometimes I look at the stars and I'm like, oh, good Lord, it's infinite. We're alone in the universe, that kind of stuff. But you can quickly interrupt it with something far more practical. And like, you don't go down the spiral of being panicked anymore. And that's the habit, right? The habit is the ability to switch seamlessly. And that's what you're building, right? It's so, I mean, to be honest, like in hindsight, it didn't have to be existential thoughts that caught your fancy. It could have been anything, right? It could have been a thought about why is the earth spherical? I mean, I could have gotten fixated on the fact that the earth is flat, right? It could have been any thought. The solution still kind of continues. You need to break that thought pattern, right? Obviously, I'm not going to go prove to myself that the earth is not flat. I mean, it's not, but like, what am I going to do? Take a spaceship and go out there and measure things? Like, no, right? It's just retrain to think about something far more relevant, immediate, that has an impact, right? Versus things that are abstract and have no real purpose in your life. I mean, I shouldn't say that. There's purpose to questioning the point of your life, but it being the source of your panic and anxiety, that's pointless. I mean, that has no productive value to it. So,
Yeah, and the the existential thoughts are, as frightening as they are, what kind of re-struck me after I recovered was like those thoughts used to scare the life out of me, but also like trees used to scare the life out of me.
yeah.
Like the mirror used to scare the life out of me. My vision scared the life. Like songs that I loved, I'd hear and I go, "That's really frightening." Like everything scared the life out of me. But what's the connective tissue between all of these different elements? And there's no logical underpinning to the
Yeah.
fear. That's what that demonstrates to you. But what is connecting them is anxiety. It's just anxiety. It's when your anxiety levels are higher than normal, and it's in this constant state of alert. And so that everything that like pops up in your consciousness, it's saying, and what's at the core of it is it's just saying, are you in danger? Are you
Yeah.
sure you're not in danger? Are you sure there's not a grizzly bear about to attack you? But it's except it's that high alert is being because there is no grizzly bear and you're perfectly safe. But it's being kind of projected onto everything and anything around you, including your own thoughts. So, but one of the lovely things about recovering is that as that anxiety fades away and stops, what you realize is that like you don't have to have a separate plan of attack for addressing those like philosophical existential thoughts. The concepts are exactly the same. The wording is exactly the same. What changes is the level of anxiety with which you approach them.
Yeah.
And this wasn't like this endless obstacle course of things I needed to deal with one by one. As you mentioned earlier, Alex, it's not like a list of existential questions that I need to be able to tick off one by one. It's the anxiety that is attributing this false power to them, and I don't need to give it that anymore.
Agreed. No, I completely agree with this. I mean, and one of the things I want to highlight for your listeners is that you'll do this practice, you'll try to do the thought replacement and the habit replacement for 2-3 months, however long it takes. I'm not saying it takes that long. And there will be a point where your baseline level of anxiety will drop. And at that point, you'll enter a new phase of exhaustion because because your body goes, oh man, you've been clenched up for 4 to 5 months now. You can just relax now a little bit, right? Because you don't have those thoughts, the rumination, and so you're not anxious, and so I was just exhausted for 2 months. It felt good because on the one hand, you're not thinking about a lot of these things, but on the other hand, you're just so exhausted. It's like pulling 7 all-nighters in a row, and like not sleeping for 7 days, and then somebody tells you, okay, you can just sleep, right? And you're just out. And then after that dip, your energy returns and you're just ready to go. I mean, I also want to add to your listeners, I mean, you cannot ignore the basics, right? The fundamentals, like you need to be eating well, you need to be sleeping well, you need to have adequate level of exercise. I mean, you cannot just sit and go, I'm going to replace my thoughts and that's my only full-time job. Like there are scaffoldings that you need to have in place in order to facilitate that, right? For example, you may do all the habit replacement in the day. Unless you sleep and you have proper recovery, none of that is consolidated to long-term memory, right? So you need to get your, whatever X hours of sleep. You need to have exercise. You need to eat well. You need to clean up, your general lifestyle. So I mean, people should take that away as well. Like you do need to have other pieces in place for all of this to work. And the other thing I want to bring up is there was a point in my recovery where I had gotten so good at thought replacement that every time something would pop up, I would think of something else that I then I overcompensated. I got to a point where I was not able to sit with my thoughts at all because when the anxiety started to drop and I started to feel more like myself, I was like, oh, I want to think about these questions now, in a much more relaxed setting. I want to be able to just question what is the meaning of life. But the habit now became so strong that anytime that question would pop up, I'd be like, well, time to make a coffee, or something like that, something more productive. So the piece that helped me with that, I have coupled your manual with a lot of mindfulness meditation as well. I do religiously perform that on a religious context, just consistently every day for 10 to 15 minutes. And being able to sit and accept thoughts in whatever shape and form they arise has been really good. So, it's not that you don't want to replace one habit of rumination with another habit of completely deflecting thoughts and completely avoiding thoughts. Like that's not the point, right? There should be a balance. You should be able to interrupt and entertain these thoughts at your own free time and your choice.
Yeah.
So that has helped me a lot. I don't know. I'm curious if you also coupled it with any kind of meditation when you were recovering.
For me, I didn't, and I've been meditating for most of my life. I meditate religiously, but not in a religious context every day as well. Um, but when I was recovering from DPDR, for me, I found that meditation just kind of got me back into my head. When what I wanted to do was get myself out of my own kind of thought process. And interestingly, in early editions of the book, I would have, like, it was a kind of a hard and fast rule that I said, like, okay, don't meditate, like don't meditate when you're on the path to recovery. But since then, I've spoken to a lot of people who have said that meditation actually did help them. So in the newer version of the book, I say, look, if you're, it is my opinion that you can recover with or without meditation. If you want to do it and you find it to be helpful and grounding, then by all means, that's fantastic. But also, if you want to set it aside, just at least until you've recovered, then you can absolutely do that too. I think it's one of these things that's it's different for different people in the recovery process.
I agree because, in this habit replacement and thought replacement, I did get to a place, and if other people have, they will relate to this, of just being in a kind of go, go, go mode. So anytime there was a thought about existential stuff, replace. Like it got into a point where I was actively able to not fall into the panic loop, but I was also not able to just sit back and just enjoy the thoughts kind of going in my head. I got a little on the other side where replacement became my primary objective. So for me, and I agree, it's personal. For me, mindfulness helped with that because there was a day when I sat down with my meditation and I had the urge to ruminate on these existential questions, and it did cause some level of panic. But then I just sat with it. I just sat with the thought. It came, it passed. Regardless of whether I answered it or didn't answer it, the outcome was the same. And that realization really also kind of supercharged the recovery as well. So yeah, in my case, it did help. And I agree. Some people, it gets you into your head, and you get too lost in there and you're like, no, that's not, yeah, fair enough.
But it's interesting as well that, like, so much of the mindfulness aspect of meditation, like, that you could really kind of frame, like, thought replacement or kind of thought distraction or refocusing even as just being mindful about your own thoughts.
Yeah, I was just going to say that. Going to say that is actually what I was doing through your manual, right? It's for me, what works is sit with your thoughts. If a thought arises and you're distracted by the thought, you focus back on your breathing, right? You focus back on something that is far more real, tangible, physical, and impactful, which is exactly what the manual does as well. You replace this negative thought spiral with something far more concrete. You could just replace it by being in the present, right? I mean, there were days when I would have, it would go off in my mind, okay, check your reality. And I was in the middle of eating a dinner. And I'd be like, okay, I could either do that or I could just replace it and enjoy my dinner. And same outcome, right? So in some like meta way, your manual it's like a manual for mindfulness almost, right? It doesn't matter what you focus on. It's the replacing the negative thought, replacing the distraction, actually. Negative, positive. It could be positive thoughts. You could be distracted by positive thoughts all the time, right? And that's just as bad, right? You're just distracted all the time. It's just replacing the thought with something more productive. That is I think the highlight of your manual. Because like I told you, right, when I first got it, I was like, this guy's telling me to do nothing. He's telling me to just do what I usually do and just hope it works. And at the time I was like, this is not gonna work. But it works. That's the nature of the habit. It's a chapter in your manual. It's called The Nature of Habit. So,
yeah. Something I wanted to ask you, Alex. So you work in the pharmaceutical industry. So you you are a scientist. I mean, you presume you describe yourself as that, right?
Yeah.
So do you think that, kind of looking back on your experience, that like, and I think I can hear this from the way you're describing it, like, but there's definitely kind of a scientific approach to it. Like there's
Yeah.
definitely kind of a methodology, a method, what's the word I'm looking for? Yeah, there's definitely a methodology in how you're describing it, because you could definitely see like the different stages and the kind of and results and outcomes. But do you think that was something you were conscious of while going through it?
Oh, no, I was not conscious of it when I was going through it. Because in the moment you're drowning, right? You're just trying to just get to the surface somehow. Um, I will say though, as somebody who has an analytical mind, I I would say to some extent it actually hindered me a little bit in my recovery because I have such a strong need and urge to rationalize things because even while I was practicing the manual, consistently, there was still a part of me that was like, yeah, but it would be nice to answer some of these questions, because
Yeah.
that's just the nature of training, right? That's just how I've trained my mind over time. But so, no, I wasn't acutely aware of this process as I was going through it. But in hindsight now, I mean, in hindsight, it's the most logical thing out there, right? So,
Yeah, yeah. The analytical thing is very interesting as well. I mean, I I definitely have maybe less so an analytical mindset, but I definitely have a very, like, if there's a problem needs to be solved,
yeah,
I will stop everything else until I get that solved, and like,
I couldn't have said it better. That,
and
exactly that.
yeah, and it will just consume me. And this could be like some things. This could be like you know installing a piece of software on the website or
Right.
something, and I'll just be like, okay, I like this. I need to get this done. How do I get this? Um, but and that really worried me when I was going through anxiety DPDR, because I thought to myself, well, if I have that kind of proclivity, then that's going to set me back, because I won't be able to just like distract myself from this, like the way that, people can with other anxiety based conditions. But what I realized in my recovery was that it was actually, certainly a hindrance in one sense, but it was a major benefit in another sense. But what I needed to do was present myself with problems or tasks that were challenging and interesting and rewarding for my mind,
Yeah.
rather than consistently focusing on this kind of washing machine of
Yeah.
existential thoughts that were going nowhere, because I could throw as much focus as I wanted into those, but it just took everything and kept going, and there was no end to it. Whereas if I focused on something like, I don't know, writing the book was a good example, or like working on a film script, or anything, like going traveling, anything. But when I focused my mind on tasks like that and the challenges that came with it, what happened after a while was like that my brain said, like, okay, this is actually much more interesting.
Exactly.
Yeah, and there's actually tangible
Yeah.
results from doing this, like, rather than having another like 25-minute panic attack about the size of the universe. Right?
Just- Your brain is good about that. It just prioritizes actions that have positive benefit to your life. At some
Yeah,
point, you do enough of it, your brain will be like, last time you sat around and panicked for 25 minutes about how something looked, it went nowhere.
yeah.
Just go run instead. It's a much better outcome. And you just naturally start to gravitate towards those alternatives. And I think
Yes.
I couldn't have said it better. I think that exactly is it, right? That's the core of the idea. So,
Yeah. And one of the things that feels very frustrating when you're going through it is that the thoughts, when you have a thought that says something like, but I'm worried that I feel like I died in a car
Yeah.
crash, and I can't remember, it. And I think I might be dead now. Like when you have a thought like that, it feels like a literal emergency. It feels like every cell in your body has gone to DEFCON 1,
Yeah.
and you're thinking, oh Jesus, like and also like aside from like the thought itself, you're also conscious that like that's a bonkers thought. Like why like what why as a sane rational person would I possibly be having that thought? And that's terrifying too. So it feels like everything. It feels like this massive emergency, and it feels incredibly counterintuitive to respond to that thought by not responding to it and by
I
just
agree.
saying, "Oh, okay, you can be there. I'm going to play Wordle instead." It feels initially it feels absolutely bizarre to do that, to respond to what feels like a nuclear blast of an explosion by just going, I'll do this instead. But when you do that consistently, what you're communicating to your brain is that, like, okay, that nuclear blast, that's just the words nuclear blast.
Yeah.
If you take your attention and focus away from it, that nuclear blast becomes like not nearly as interesting as Wordle. And the first word you'll try in Wordle is blast, right?
Yes.
But
No, I agree.
but
Yeah.
you know what? You can win a Wordle.
Yeah.
You can't win at that thought.
Yeah. And I think you've accurately described it. It's just, yeah, it's this idea that you just get more out of doing. Yeah, it's very uncomfortable. I mean, to your body, it's the equivalent of a nuclear attack happening next door to you. I mean, you would not be playing Wordle if that were happening, right? Like that's just
Right.
maybe, I don't know. Maybe you would, I don't know. But like I'm just like that, it's so uncomfortable because the moment you make that switch, those thoughts get 10 times louder. And they're like, no, no, don't ignore me. Don't ignore what I'm saying here. But then it starts to quiet down over time because your brain is just like, you can go do it, but evidence to indicate that it's useful is very, very low. And over time, it's like, yeah, okay, that voice just gets slower and slower and slower until it's just like a tiny little squeak every now and again. And you're like, I know, I hear you, you're there, but I got other things to do, right? Because the other thing to also, I'm really happy that you use DEFCON correctly. Most people think DEFCON 5 is the highest level. It's really DEFCON 1. So I'm happy about that. But over time, yeah, I think the initial phases are just really painful, and I think it's I really want to get this across. Switching your thought habit like this from, oh, I should just do Wordle instead, and not necessarily Wordle. It's excruciating when it starts. Excruciating. There's no other way to describe it because you are ignoring a fundamental instinct in your body, which is survival. However made up your threat is, at the end of the day, your body wants to survive, and you are telling it that I'm going to ignore this survival mechanism. And that is really hard to do. So,
Yeah, yeah. Um, the reason I
I mean,
use DEF CON correctly is because I'm reading Command and Control by Eric Schlosser at the moment, which is about the history of the nuclear weapons, and particularly in the States. But he refers to that a lot. And also, I'm watching Turning Point on Netflix, which is about the history of the Cold War and the bomb. It's absolutely fascinating, and I kind of get into that through watching Oppenheimer, of course. And as much as I love Oppenheimer, and also, by the way, Cillian Murphy is from Cork, so like I friends who know him from back in the day, like
really,
yes,
national
yes, yes.
treasure. He's a national treasure.
He is an absolute hero, and by all accounts, an absolute sweetheart of a man as well. But as much as I loved Oppenheimer, it's so Interstellar. Interstellar is my jam. Like it's like Interstellar is one of those films that every single time I watch it, I can't quite believe it covers the scale that it does with such swiftness, but it never feels rushed. the concepts, the bravery of saying, like, you know, that love is one of the things that holds the universe together. I think because I remember watching it. I always liked it, and then I watched it like during COVID, during lockdown. I watched it a couple of times again, and I kind of fell in love with it a bit more. And now when I watch it, it's I think it might be my favorite film. I think it's absolutely perfect. Like, yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
as a filmmaker yourself, you can appreciate it more than I can. I mean, there's rumors that there's going to be a re-release in IMAX in November,
Oh
and
my gosh.
so that's top of my list to do. But the thing is, like, I mean, people need to also see this. Like, I would not be talking about I mean, if I got an hour of time with you like 6-7 months ago, I would spend 0 seconds talking about anything interesting at all. I would be picking your brain apart. Is this going to work? What am I doing wrong? What's the next step? Like, the fact that your brain now has real estate to deal with good things in your life is the goal, right?
Yeah.
And you say this in your manual too. You don't ever get, I mean, I'm curious, do you still have moments where you have these questions, these reality checks? I do. I mean, I certainly do. I wake up some mornings and I'm like, oof, some of this stuff does not feel real today. But it's now so ingrained that my brain is like, great, you have this question, but we are not spending any time on this because you did that for 9 months and you got nowhere with that. There are more pressing issues to do, more pressing things that you need to get on with. And it's that very act that takes the kind of the juice out of these questions. And it goes from panic inducing to just a nuisance. You know, it's just there. It's not going to cause you any panic. If you want to deal with it when you're free and you have more time, great, go for it. But right now, that's not a priority. And that's the outcome. That's as best as I can describe my recovery, right? It's not that it's not there. It's there. But there's so much more evidence against pursuing it than for it that my brain just makes its own decision on what it wants to do. So,
yeah, to answer your question, Alex, yeah, I do. I mean, very rarely from time to time, I'll feel very low levels of DPDR as part of anxiety, because sometimes I get anxious and stressed out. But like, as somebody said to me in an interview, like last year, it's a mental health nurse, and he said, like, to experience feelings of depersonalization, derealization is to be human. Like, these are perfectly natural. Again, if you go through life without experiencing these feelings, you're in a minority. Like, most people experience this. Like, if you describe these symptoms to people, like most people will say, oh, I said that kind of briefly, like, or if somebody has a panic attack, if somebody's in a car accident, like, they'll say, oh, geez, it kind of just felt like I wasn't there. Like, you know, if somebody flies to Australia and feels jet lagged for a couple of days, they'll say, I just felt kind of dreamy and weird, like, you know, like these are perfectly natural, normal feelings, but just like all symptoms of anxiety, they're meant to last for a short period of time. They are your body telling you that you're under too much stress, or you need to relax yourself a bit. But when you interpret them in that way, which is the correct interpretation, that's what allows them to fade away and stop. It's like the reason this turns into a problem in the first place in terms of depersonalization disorder is misinterpreting them and then jumping to horrible, catastrophic conclusions about going crazy, that you damage yourself, that you're going to die, that you're already dead, all these different things. So when you have that understanding of it, that prevents it from ever becoming an issue again.
It's interesting, though, that this explanation is great, Abby, but it's also interesting to note that in order for the interpretation to be incorrect in the first place, you need some baseline level of anxiety and panic. You don't just get knocked into interpreting it incorrectly. It's because you're in some heightened state of panic or anxiety that you interpret it incorrectly, right? So almost always, I think from all your interviews, almost everybody had an underlying cause that was unrelated, like a bad trip or like a panic attack or accident, death, whatever, right? It's the incorrect interpretation is the result of you having some like baseline level of anxiety and panic. Because otherwise you would not misinterpret it. Otherwise you would be like, oh, I'm probably just jet lag. Your mind wouldn't go to, oh my God, I died and I woke up somewhere else, right? Yeah.
Yeah. I like the example I always like to give is like nobody ever was like chased by a grizzly bear and then got home and said, I had the worst panic attack while that bear was chasing me. Like I felt really disconnected,
Yeah.
It's like if you would experience that in the context of a life or death situation, and you wouldn't question it because you understand through the experience that's why it happened. It's when you experience these feelings without the context of like a physical stressor or an actual like life or death situation, that's when the focus tends to turn inwards, and then we say, okay, well, but in the same way that like somebody that like one person might like experience heart palpitations and just say, geez, I better switch to decaf for the day,
Yeah.
and then another person experiences heart palpitations and they think, I'm having a heart attack and I'm going to die, and then that causes the heart to beat faster, and it causes them to call the ambulance, and off they go to accident and emergency, and then and it turns into this just big frightening experience. But what's at the core of it is the basic interpretation of that initial symptom of anxiety, and it turning into a feedback loop, and then a catastrophic interpretation.
But people, I mean,
please,
sorry.
No, that's okay. Go ahead, please. I'm finished.
I was going to say, different people have a different tendency to interpret things differently, right? Like some people just tend to be more pessimistic in their interpretations, and that doesn't help as well, right? Some people tend to be worriers, some people tend to be more relaxed. So there's no one like cause of this. And like and you mentioned this in your book too. There's a lot of guilt around this stuff. You at some point in your process, you go, I cannot believe I'm in this place. Like, how did I always thought I had a good handle on everything until this happens. And then you just feel all this guilt, but there's nothing to be guilty of. It's just your natural tendency sometimes to overthink and over question things. It happens all the time. So
yeah, absolutely. Mine was triggered by a bad weed experience, and I tore myself apart with guilt, saying like, why did I do that? Why did I knew it was stronger than I thought it was, but I kept smoking it. What an idiot! Like, why did I do this? And then what I realized was that during recovery, what I realized was that the weed wasn't the important part. The important part was that I had a panic attack. Like if I'd smoked that weed and I had a great time, exactly. The panic attack wouldn't have happened. Now that's not to say that like I wouldn't have had a panic attack like a year later because of like other stress I was experiencing, and developed DPDR that way. The blame thing is just it's another one of these kind of hindrances that are not hindrances, but things just kind of like these that slow down. Feelings of guilt are a massive overcomplication of what's a very, very simple process, and part of recovery is taking that interpretive scaffolding away from it, and just saying like no, take guilt away from it, take shame away from it, take kind of unpacking like hypothetical trauma in your past away from it, and look at what this is. You had a panic attack, that's all, and that's all it needs to be. The idea of proportionality bias. Yeah. So it's when we experience something that feels absolutely massive, and it feels like you're literally in a different dimension. Your whole life has been turned upside down, and then psychologically we tend to want to attribute massive explanations to it because that feels more in keeping with the narrative of what we've been experiencing. Yeah. But it's part of recovery is taking all that away and just saying, as strange as it may seem, when you're going through it, this was triggered by a panic attack, and it feels like, and that's all it needs to take, it doesn't need to be a massive explanation like I died or I'm in a coma or a video game or anything like that. This can literally be like a panic attack, and most people will experience panic attacks, and that's all it takes, and that's okay.
And unfortunately, that clarity eludes you in the moment, right? Like in the moment, you're just like, oh, there's no way this is a panic attack. This feels way worse. This feels like a life-ending situation. But in hindsight, yeah, it was a panic attack. That's all it was, right? Not that I'm not minimizing panic attacks. It's just that relative to relative to a heart attack, much simpler as an explanation. So,
Yeah, certainly. Alex, I know you've spoken about it already, but just briefly, how was the DP manual helpful in your recovery?
Oh, I it's hard to put into words. But so my routine with the DP manual was, okay, so I would follow what's in the DP manual, of course, but I would wake up every morning, and you have 3 videos that were really good. You had this pep talk, which was really, really good. And then I would listen to that every morning. And then thankfully the DP manual is a quick read. And once you've read it a couple of times, you can go directly to the sections that are relevant to you with whatever you're struggling that day. So I used it. I replaced my podcast and music listening with your pep talks. And you have a very calming voice. But also more importantly, you would wake up in the morning and the first thing you would hear is the logical explanation for what it is that's going on. And it just sets you up well for that day. And then in the day, if I would struggle with certain things, for example, blurred vision, or I would be like looking in the mirror kind of triggered me, I would just go to the relevant section. I would read through it a couple of times and automatically that reduces. I mean, just having something like the manual reduces your panic so much because you know more than you know what it is and what's happening. You know all the things it's not. You know it's not a brain tumor. You know it's not schizophrenia. Like all of those high impact, high probability to kill you options are gone, right? And the moment that happens, already your baseline level of anxiety drops. The piece that I found really challenging, obviously, was the replacing the thoughts, right? Every time I had the thought to do something else, and your chapter on the nature of habit was the most helpful there. So, I mean, I cannot recommend it enough. Primarily because, I mean, I mentioned this earlier, is when I first read it, I thought, what? I mean, this doesn't tell me anything. But then when you truly understand, that's exactly what you want to hear. It is exactly, in fact, all the information you need in as condensed of a form as possible. And obviously I have no reason to endorse this if it didn't actually work, right? And it does work. And it's because it takes away all the complexity that you've created artificially, guilt and shame and hypothesizing and going to doctors and Googling WebMD or whatever. It takes away all that and it brings it down to here's what's going on and here's what you need to do to get out of it. And that, I think, it was the only book that I found that got directly to the point, and I really appreciated that, and cannot emphasize enough how important it was. Even the videos and the audiobooks and all of it, I consumed all of it, and it's fantastic. So.
That's great, Alex. I'm so happy it was helpful in your recovery. So a question that I ask everyone, and a question that gets asked of me all the time, is this: now that you've recovered, is getting back to normal really getting back to normal?
Yeah, great. I would find this spot in your interviews whenever I've listened to all, by the way, because in those dark days when you think that there's no hope, listening to other people and believing that they got through it and you will too, really keeps you going. So people listening to this, I know, and we both on this call know how bad it can get and how dark it gets, but it will get better. And to answer your question, there is no state of normalcy. It just is what it is. You do not wake up one morning and you go, oh, I'm actively not having these thoughts. Or, oh, look at that, I've overcome it. You wake up one morning and you realize, I'm late for a 9 a.m. meeting, and that's the only priority there is for me right now.
Exactly.
There's nothing else that has any more priority to me in this moment. Existential questions come and go. They do not have an impact on you. So being normal is not a state that you become aware of. Being normal is it just is. It's very hard to describe, but you do not wake up one morning and go, recovered. You wake up one morning and you go, what? Why am I asking this question about existential stuff exactly? Has not, no. And that's it. And the other thing with this stuff is, and the reason I wanted to do this interview sooner rather than later is because you forget. You have no memory. Sometimes I think back to last year and I'm like, I cannot put myself back in that place. So what am I going to tell people? So you will forget all about it for the simple reason that your brain will make an educated decision that ruminating on pointless questions has no impact on your life. You would much rather invest your time in more meaningful life goals. And that's all normalcy is. It just is. So.
Yeah. I always like to think of the example of because when people ask me about what does recovery feel like, but it's essentially the same thing as having a song stuck in your head. So if you have a song stuck in your head,
by the way, great, fantastic.
Yes, if you've got a song stuck in your head for 48 hours and it's driving you crazy, you just keep humming it, and every time you keep drifting over to it, and then 2 weeks later, somebody says to you, "Hey, do you remember you had that song stuck in your head?" You go, "Oh, yeah." And then if they said, what was it like forgetting about it? What did that process feel like?
Yeah.
It would be almost impossible to describe it because it happened while you were listening to other music,
Yes.
It happened while you weren't kind of going, how do I forget this? I need to have this gone by tomorrow. All that was pointless. The process of forgetting happened in the background naturally, which it does all the time, while you were focused on things that were much more interesting. And the thing you mentioned as well, Alex, of I can't remember what it felt like. This is such a common thing as well. It is for me. When I always find interesting that when I describe my experiences with this as well, there was a time in my life where I literally could not walk to the bathroom in my family home because I was afraid of the mirror. There was a mirror inside there, and the mirror absolutely just shook me, to some extent it still does. Yeah. But back in the day, I remember that. I remember not being able to walk across the hall to go to the bathroom. And I have no idea what I was worried about. I remember that experience clearly, but I don't know what I was worried about. But the reason is that but back then, my anxiety levels went up to 10 out of 10. And I didn't know why it was happening. I didn't know what to do about it. And they stayed like that for way longer than they needed to. And then I inadvertently did a lot of the wrong things that kept it going, constantly researching it, constantly clearing my day to think about it. And then when I did the right things to change it, that got back to normal, and the anxiety levels of anxiety got back to normal. And then I realized that all these fears that I had about the mirror and the sky and the size of the universe were all based on that. They were the levels of anxiety. And then I looked back on it and I was like, I don't, I remember those experiences, but I can't relate to it anymore. I can't relate to that level of fear anymore. And it's a very common experience that people say that once you recover, you look back on the whole experience and you say, I just don't know what I was afraid of,
Yeah, because you just cannot simulate that level of dread. You just cannot do it. I mean, you cannot trick your mind into believing that you may now be a ghost, right? It just cannot happen. You're so entrenched now in reality, and reality makes complete sense to you now that you cannot distort it in any way, even if you try. So that's why I wanted to do this as quickly as I can, because I got to be honest with you, 2 years from now, somebody's going to be like, oh, do you remember not feeling real? I'm going to be like, what? I'm going to be the other person. I mean, what are you talking about? Right. And, so I hope everybody gets there. That's the goal. I did the one last thing I wanted to address is also medication. I never, there were times when I was very close to being like, just give me something to take the damn edge off, right? Because if this is really anxiety, if you kill the anxiety levels, maybe all of this goes away. I'm not endorsing it one way or the other, just for completeness. I didn't take any medications. I still don't. I know that they can be effective depending on your particular experience, but yeah, part of it was stubbornness because I wanted to know if I could just do it without the help of medication, but I'm not endorsing that. Like, you got to do what you got to do. I know that there's a lot of help that can be derived from it. So.
Yeah, certainly. And obviously, I'm not a medical health professional. I can't give any advice on medication, but in my own experience, I found that the best way to, and I did take medication for a while. I did take SSRIs, and I took benzos at the start as well of my experience, which I found to be very difficult. But I've always find a good way to think about medication in broad strokes is not to make the mistake of thinking of them as being something that's going to switch it off. Or if you find a medication that works for you, like, don't make the mistake of thinking, okay, well, now I just like take the medication until I'm recovered. A much better way to think of them is to think of them as a helping hand. So in your recovery process, you have a toolkit of tools available to you. These different techniques, these ways of thinking about it, these like behavioral patterns, all the rest of it. One of the tools you have available to you is medication. If you decide to take medication, obviously you're doing so under the instruction of your doctor. You understand that there's like you understand that there's like certain side effects that potentially happen. But if you decide to take medication, don't disregard the rest of the tools available to you.
Agreed.
and continue to use them. And also to remember that, like, that medication is like, they're selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors. So they can raise the level of serotonin in your brain, which can reduce the symptoms of anxiety and DPDR, which can, again, give you a helping hand to move through the recovery process. But again, to not disregard the rest of the tools that are available to you, because it's essentially the changing of the habit that is the core of recovery, and medication could be a helping hand in that process, whether you decide if you decide to take it.
I couldn't agree more. Yep.
Alex, I've got one more question for you. There's going to be a lot of people watching this who are going through DPDR, who might be in the same position that you were in the days and weeks after this first happened to you. If you could go back and have a chat with yourself when this first happened, what advice would you have for yourself? What advice would you have for those people watching?
Oh, I wish I could go back. I wish I could get back the last year of my life. But okay, so a couple of things. I'm not generally regretful. I'm glad that I went through this experience. DPDR has been a gift because I've gotten to learn a lot of things about myself in my life. But if I could go back at that moment of that panic attack and the week following that panic attack, I would tell myself, you had a panic attack. The cause is irrelevant. It was just your body not being able to figure out the source of the danger, and just let it be at that. Now, that's the early stage. But if you are at a point where you've gotten stuck in that rumination of existential dread, there's no immediate thing that I could say that will pull you out of it. That's just the honest truth. It will take some amount of work, and the work that you need to do is all in this manual. So if you've just had that panic attack and you're kind of still freaking out, just remember that it was a panic attack. Cause is irrelevant. Just focus on your life and the panic will subside. If you have gotten caught in that orbit of ruminating on these questions and thoughts, and you feel like you're in full-blown DPDR, it's going to take some work. It's going to suck for a while, but it will get better. It's going to suck for a while. There's no other way to say it. But follow the manual and just keep up with your general health. Do not ignore your life at the expense of this. Do not stop seeing people. Do not stop your jobs. I mean, there may be cases where you would need to, as much as possible, try to retain normalcy in your life if you've already made that cross into having DPDR. But if you've, panic and anxiety are parts of being human. It happens all the time. It will continue to happen. We'll have panic attacks. We'll have anxiety. They are what they are, right? You do not need to make anything more out of it than what it is. And that's easier said than done. I appreciate the difficulty. But yeah, if you do find yourself caught in the spiral, you will need to put in the work to break that habit. But you will be able to break that habit because it is a habit, and all habits can be broken. So, yeah.
That's great advice. Alex, it's been so lovely chatting with you, man. I really, really enjoyed this, and it's been so interesting to hear your take on the experience, your insight, the kind of the applying some of the scientific methodology to the experience, even retrospectively. It's been so interesting, and I know there's going to be people watching this who find your story absolutely inspirational. It's been a real pleasure having you on the channel.
Hey, I just want to say, Sean, I cannot owe you enough of a debt of gratitude for what you did. Yeah, I don't think there is literally an amount for getting back your life and getting back to normalcy and just enjoying your life again. So thank you from the bottom of my heart. And for people listening to this, get the manual, follow it religiously. I have no reason to endorse this other than the fact that it does work. And I know how much it sucks to be where you are right now. And it does suck. But it will get better, and you will not have a single memory of it very soon. And that'll be the greatest thing ever. So, thank you, Sean.
Fanta. You're so welcome. Thanks so much, Alex. It's been great having you on the channel, and keep up the good work and enjoy life post recovery.
You as well. If you're ever in the Boston, Cambridge area, you absolutely should let me know, because I would love to host and see you in person.
There's a strong chance that I'll be there again in the next few years, so you'll be the first to know about it. And likewise, if you're ever over in Ireland, give me a shout. We'll definitely meet up.
Absolutely. Thank you, Sean.
Okay, take care. Cheers, Alex. Bye-bye.
Bye.